What's up, people? That was a reference from a Japanese metal band. Welcome to Life Study Library. This is your host, Layosh. In this channel, you'll be able to learn about these interesting and educational science and psychology that might greatly change your life for the better, as I'll be using scientific evidence and scholarly articles to support my claim. Now, if you like what you're about to hear, you can be a great helper for me by liking this video and subscribing to Life Study Library. By the way, if you were able to guess the reference, please answer in the comments. Now, let's get going. In my many previous videos, I said that controlling your emotion is very important. And before I go on any further, this does not mean that you have to bottle up your emotion and pretend it's not there. That's not what I mean. I wish I didn't have to explain all this, but for my newer viewers, I've been repeatedly telling people why this claim is straight up doo-doo. What I mean here is that we are able to control our emotions by using various techniques based on science and psychology, and not through willpower. But for now, ignore the part about what kind of approaches we take to control our emotions. Let's first focus on the fact that if we are able to somehow control our emotions during specific situations, then it would of course be a great thing for us to know about, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about, using a research article written by researchers from Ohio State University, University of Kentucky, and University of California, Davis in 2021. What's interesting about the study is that it's pretty much a research that went to ask 582 professional therapists about what technique we could use in order to control our emotions. So these samples aren't just random people. These are all professional therapists who all definitely have more knowledge about psychology and psychotherapy than the average Joe. These professionals specialize in cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy, and third-wave cognitive behavioral therapy, in addition to a small percentage of other types of therapies. So what the study basically did was that it sat down with these therapists and gave them a stressful scenario like failing an important exam, or fighting with your spouse, falling ill, failing at your job, these kinds of negative occurrences that would make people feel negative. And then the sample therapists were asked if they know any emotional control techniques they can use in situations like these. After jotting down some techniques that could potentially solve the issue, the therapists were tasked to rate each of these methods from 0, completely ineffective, to 100, completely effective. Basically, it's a rating of various therapy techniques when solving a stressful situation. And yes, it is only a survey question, but because the samples were all professionals of this field, the study can be considered legitimate. And just like how it was predicted, the sample therapists tend to choose the same kinds of answers. So let's look at the ranking. 9th place goes to hiding your emotion. This is a pretty obvious placing, as I've already talked about why this is not the optimal method in my many previous videos, so I'm gonna skip the explanation. Basically, you're not solving anything because you're not doing anything. Alright, let's move on. 8th place goes to removing yourself from that situation or the scene. Now, I have a personal bias towards this. I think in many instances, it's actually the most effective method you can take. If you feel like your workplace or your partner is toxic, the easiest thing you can do to solve the entire issue is to just leave. And then that'll just solve the entire thing. However, I am aware that we usually are not able to just do this at a whim. So yeah, despite the actual effectiveness, I do understand why it's placed here. 7th place goes to fixing our social environment. Unless you work in a completely solo environment, you will have other people involved in your work. And these people are, I don't want to say beneficial, but can help you create betterment. Plenty of other studies have claimed that you can actually find a great amount of happiness and fulfillment when you go out to help other people. This is because helping others, in this case your coworkers or your boss, you feel the sense that you are contributing to the betterment of your environment. You feel that your existence is actually meaningful. And so, becoming an active helper, even with trivial things like carrying stuff through the hallway or something like that, you can greatly help yourself by helping others, your social environment. Moving on to the 5th technique, which is acceptance. And I do not mean this as in you should give up on trying to manage your emotion. It's a different kind of acceptance called self-acceptance. This is basically you accepting your whole self, including your flaws and what you lack, Oh, okay, that wasn't enough of an explanation. So let me elaborate a little more. So what a lot of people tend to do is to focus on self-confidence when they try to become more confident, or when they try to become more attractive, become more sure of themselves. And they read books and watch videos that teach you how to become more confident, how to boost your self-esteem and all that strange stuff. And this method is not going to work for a number of reasons, but that's not what I'm going to talk about in this video. What I want to know here is that rather than fruitlessly attempting to become more confident with yourself, you need to focus on self-acceptance. This self-acceptance is about you accepting your whole self, including things about yourself that you're not proud of. It's about facing the real you and accepting that this is your current self. Not being sure of your current self and living in the past regret or your future worries leads to negative rumination, a state where you get unfocused on your current self, a part that you actually have control of, because you're so hung up on stuff that actually happened or have yet to happen, which you cannot change. I talked about this in detail in my previous video called Actually Helpful Self-Help. 5 Ways to be Unconfident. So if you want to know more about rumination and this whole shebang, then you should go check this one out too. And of course, rumination and not having self-compassion leads to many damaging outcomes like addiction, depression, long-term stress, physical and mental deterioration. Yeah, we don't want any of that. And according to numerous studies, including one that's conducted in Northwestern University in 2013, it made the samples do a self-controlling exercise, and results show the 60% decrease of overeating and a 50% decrease in impulsive spending. How this worked? Well, the samples did a self-control exercise which allowed them to experience a sense of control, a feeling that some things in their lives can be changed and improved if they put effort. A lot of times, depression or low self-esteem or low self-confidence gets intensified by the feeling that I'm powerless and I can't take control of my life. So the study basically shoved evidence of meaningful improvement to their faces and said, look, this is your work and you were able to change your life. You have control in your life. So the self-acceptance exercise made you realize you can control your life for the better. And this feeling of self-control is a great tool you can use to improve your life and your emotion of happiness and fulfillment. Seeing my channel grow, however little growth there is, makes me realize that I'm improving my life and my emotions by providing positivity to the world. The sense of control is a pretty major influencer that can allow positivity in your life and let you experience the feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment. So it's up here in the ranking. If you want to know more about the general concept of self-compassion and how it's a better replacement of self-confidence that can actually make you more confident, I have some past videos that you can watch to further learn about this. Alright, next up. 4th place is information gathering. This one is probably the most intuitive technique, and I'm not surprised if you thought this should be placed at the first place, as many people might simply sum it up to, if you're unsatisfied with your emotional condition, why not just solve the issue? And yes, gathering information to solve the issue should be the number one thing you should do if you're already in a calm emotional state. I'm making this video in the assumption that you're still in the grieving state from whatever tragedy that happened, or you're still in the stage of unsureness and unconfidence. You're watching this video most likely because you're unsatisfied with your issue of your current emotional state, and the techniques I've been talking about so far are all doable on the spot, but its effects momentary. The same problem can happen the next day, and despite you now knowing how you can solve the issue, I can understand it's not enough, because the methods that are usually told does not have a long-lasting effect. I mean, if a long-lasting positive effect happens to you, then good for you. But for the many who probably are still having trouble, this is where you can look at the permanent solution by gathering information from your life and your environment. Sorry, I kind of got all over the place, but what I'm trying to say is that when it comes to how directly you can solve the issue, it should be the most basic thing on the list. And the only reason it's not at the top is because you need to first do other things to put yourself in the stage where you can effectively gather information to control your emotional struggles. Okay, that was a slightly weird interlude. I hope everyone got that. But anyways, that was the 4th place. Moving on to the 3rd place. The techniques you can use here to take control of your emotion is emotional expression. From this point forward, I think all of these methods are very effective. Yeah, so emotional expression, another technique that can easily be misinterpreted. This is another technique that is widely accepted by society as the go-to solution when you're emotionally vulnerable and unstable, because emotional expression is another definition for therapy. And yes, for this technique, therapy can be a more appropriate example. However, there can be solutions where it doesn't cost any money, unlike visiting a professional therapist who usually costs by the hour. Emotional expression in this case is about expressing what you're feeling in great detail. When you're stressed out from waiting to see how you did on your work, in school, or at your job, situations where you can't really do anything but to wait. Emotional expression is about you trying to understand what kinds of emotions you are feeling by, for example, writing it out on paper, or, like the traditional method, talking about it with a trusted peer. This is another method that is a staple in therapy sessions, where people talk about their feelings with others who are also there to do the same. This technique is focusing on you trying to understand what exactly you're feeling by expressing your emotions as detailed as possible. So one typical method would be for you to write about your anger or sadness or grief or any kind of negative emotions that you're struggling on a paper for like 10 minutes. And you have to be as detailed as possible without thinking about what to write, or if your current thoughts is even relevant to the session, or if your writing makes sense at all. And believe me, writing about what you're feeling non-stop for 10 minutes, it seems doable, but it's actually really hard, and you'll find yourself so quick to feel like everything has been written. But you still have to keep writing, honestly, about anything at this point. If you're feeling hungry, then you can just write about how you're hungry, whatever that pops up into your mind. This is a technique that is called expressive writing, and numerous studies have helped prove its effects on letting you understand exactly what you're feeling. This is actually a pretty useful and on-the-spot method that you can take to understand your emotions and use it to resolve your negative sides of your emotion using psychology and science. So I might talk about this in more detail and how its effects work and all that in the future video, but for now, you can just try this technique for yourself and see what happens with you afterwards. So anyways, that was the third place, expressing your emotions. Moving on to the second place, which is actually two separate techniques that worked pretty much equally to the samples, and one of them is called reappraisal. This method, if I were to explain in just one sentence, is that it's a technique to overcome emotional issues or a stressful situation by looking at the problem from a new perspective. When you're sad, for example, because you screwed up on your work or got dumped by a partner, we so easily fall to the negative loop of, I failed on my work because I'm an incompetent person, or I got dumped because I'm a bad partner. And it's understandable that people blame the fault on themselves or some other factor, as you can totally blame it on someone else. And you can do this way easier than trying to actually sit down and calmly think about the reason why it didn't work and how you can improve in the future. I'm sure everyone had this experience. And often, when you're at this stage of grief, you will likely not be in a calm state where you can clearly think like a regular person. And so, by reappraising, by thinking, blaming on myself or other people isn't leading me anywhere. Let's think about my breakup from a completely new angle. Okay, well, I broke up now, so I'm single. And since I'm not committed to a single partner, now I can go out to the clubs and hit on as many hotties as I want. Of course, you do need to correct any mistakes if it was your fault, but I'm sure you can see that with this technique, you can set yourself free from beating yourself up unnecessarily, or putting the blame on someone else, which doesn't lead anywhere usually. Well, I guess in certain situations you can blame on other people, but it's not hard to see that this can get out of hand so easily, as you can think, this wasn't my fault, it's because of the other person, when you're partly at fault too. And turning away from this reality won't improve your future behavior. This technique is more towards those who want to put an end specifically to their bad behavior of self-blaming. And some of you might think that this technique is very similar to the sixth place I've talked about earlier, removing your attention. and it does have some similarities, but the technique reappraisal is different from the other one because attention removal is only a temporary method you can use to get out of your constant rumination. Hence, it's ranked at a lower place. Whereas reappraisal is a more of a permanent way in which you can actually find the reason for your negative emotion, and that reason can let you out completely from that grieving itself. Reappraisal is more effective than attention removal, but does require a little bit more practice to get the hang of. So I recommend you start with attention removal, and if the problem doesn't disappear, or if you think removing your attention momentarily won't solve the core issue, you can try reappraisal. I understand that you can momentarily distract yourself from the feeling of dread if, for example, you are a student and you have to study for a difficult exam, but that's obviously not going to make the studying for the exam itself disappear. So at this point, you can use reappraisal, and you view the exam not as the scary monster that'll eat you alive and will be the deciding factor of your life, but, for example, as a challenge in which you can test your knowledge and how much you've learned up till now. Or if you're generally an anxious person and you feel the dread and the nervousness no matter how much you've prepared yourself, then you can think to yourself, I'm feeling nervous and anxious because I'm doing something that's difficult for me, which of course will make me feel nervous. My body is actually doing a really good job telling me that I need to focus and pay attention because what I'm about to do requires my full attention. So thank you, my body, for letting me know. This method ties in with removing your attention, the 6th place on this list, and acceptance, the 5th place on this list. You momentarily distract yourself and look at the issue from a different perspective, all in the while accepting your whole self, your positive and negative traits. Okay, now we're moving on to the other 2nd place, which is support from trusted peers about your emotion. Aside from actually solving the core issue, I think this is the most ideal method you can take to overcome your emotional state. This method requires you to have a trusted other whom you have no issue talking about your insecurities or your weakness. And yeah, finding this person out of everyone else will be really hard, mainly because the trust between you and the other person has to be built through a considerable amount of time. But if you do successfully find that right person who you can trust with almost anything, the amount of emotional security you can get is immense. This happens not only because you're sure that the person won't sell you out or betray you and stuff, but also having the understanding that you have this good friend in general, knowing that you'll have someone whom you can lean on. This also helps you out with stabilizing your emotional state. This can be your friends, your parents, your partner, and yeah, not everyone can be a trusted peer, but anyone can become one. And there are plenty of scientific techniques you can use to figure out if that person is worthy of your trust. And according to the study, having this assurance that there are people in this world who you can immensely trust has such an incredible effect on your emotional stability. But I still gotta emphasize that building this relationship and trust takes time, so you most definitely should not share your darkest secrets with the person you just met recently, no matter how trustworthy that person seems to be. And with that, we're moving on to the 1st place. 1st place, drum roll, goes to actually solving the issue. Of course, finding the actual solution that can solve the issue instantly is the best method you should take in order to solve your emotional issues. If, for example, you're having emotional issues because you're being abused by your partner, then breaking up with them would be the most direct way you can solve the issue. So I guess the 1st place was kind of obvious when you think about it. The only problem is that the most direct and effective method isn't usually the easiest method to start off of. If you're insecure about your work performance, then yes, the easiest and the most effective and the most direct way to solve the issue is to work hard and perform well. But life is more complicated than that, and if there are any issues in your life or anything you want to improve on, there are more than one approaches you can take to solve the issue, and these approaches are usually something that you might have never thought of before. The methods I've introduced in this video can serve as additional tools you can keep in your mind in case any issue appears out of the blue. Science, and specifically psychology, can open you up to options like this because what might work for one person might not work the same for the other. Or worse, it might even backfire. By researching many people about themselves, science and psychology can establish a common cause and effect that can apply to the most amount of people. And if that applies to 90% of the world's population, for example, then it'll have a great possibility of applying to you. Of course, today's study doesn't have a sample size that large, but this is a special case because the results shown in this study was done by professional therapists who all have vast knowledge about emotional management and techniques that can help people accomplish that. This is my opinion, but the structure of the study kind of makes it like a meta-analysis because it's a culmination of multiple samples with the knowledge made up from multiple individual studies. I don't know if I explained that well, but in short, if an expert knows 10 studies about a certain topic, then gather 10 experts and you'll have 100 total studies of reference. So yeah, this might be something you want to consider in order to manage and ride your emotions. So that was pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope this video helped you in some way. The video and book recommendations I've talked about throughout the video can be checked in the description. So if you want to learn more about similar topics regarding emotional management, or if you just want to venture out into some other topics regarding science and psychology, then please go right ahead. This was your host, Layosh. This is my last video of the year, so you see the 2024 version of me next year. Have a good rest of the year, folks. Peace out.